The first strike one cold night. In the silence of a quiet neighborhood, Daniel Rivers was sitting in his living room, concentrating on his work. He was quite busy with his work, but he kept turning to look out the window, where the lights from the surrounding houses shone down on the quiet street. At that moment, a faint sound, like scratching on the door, lingered in the cold air. He stopped, raised his head, and looked through the crack of the window. There was only darkness and the occasional snowflakes. Nothing. He turned back to his work, but then the scratching sound came again. It was getting clearer and clearer. It couldn't be the sound of the neighborhood cat. Daniel sighed and walked to the door, just a tired but necessary movement. He opened the door a little, intending to see who was playing around so late at night. But when the door opened, he stopped dead. In front of him, a puppy stood, its fur wet, trembling, its eyes wide open in fear and making small, pleading sounds. It was not an ordinary dog, but a long-haired, seemingly abandoned dog, its body thin and its eyes filled with panic. It licked its lips, staring at Daniel as if seeking help. Daniel stared at the dog. He frowned, feeling unbelievable at this situation. He wanted to close the door, not wanting to get involved in nameless troubles. But something in his heart made him stop, unable to refuse such a life. He took a deep breath and carefully opened the door wider. "Okay, come in," he said, his voice low and tired. The dog did not hesitate, immediately entering the house. Just then, a weak breathing sounded from the darkness. Daniel turned around in surprise and saw a small figure standing near the doorstep. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, eyes full of fear, stood there. He held the puppy Rocky in his arms as if it were all he had. Maxwell Turner, or Max, was the boy's name. He said nothing, just stood there worried, his little legs swaying from the cold. The boy looked at Daniel, eyes wide as if wondering if he could find safety here. Daniel looked at the boy for a long moment, then sighed. Worry and confusion were written all over his face. He couldn't leave them alone, although he had never thought he would have to face a situation like this. Seeing the boy's weakness and the hurt in his eyes, he knew he couldn't close the door and turn away. "Come in," Daniel said, his voice calm. "Both of you come in." Max said nothing, just nodded and stepped inside, holding Rocky close to him. They entered the warm house, but the tension was still there. Daniel closed the door, but in his mind, a question began to form. What happened to this boy? Daniel couldn't take his eyes off Max and Rocky. He quickly checked to see if the dog was injured, but Rocky only looked tired and shivering from the cold. Max sat silently, not saying a word. He looked around the room, as if trying to find shelter, but his fear was obvious. Occasionally, the boy's eyes turned to Daniel, but he didn't dare say anything. Daniel realized that this was not just a simple night of rescue. This boy was carrying a story, a secret that would definitely change both of their lives. Max didn't answer when Daniel asked about his family, just sat there, eyes closed as if everything around him was a mess. Daniel didn't force him, just let the boy sit quietly in the warm space, until the night gradually passed. He didn't know that this would be the beginning of a great journey, but he had a feeling that his life would never be the same again. The fateful encounter, the next morning, the weak light of dawn shone into Daniel's small house. Winter was in full swing, snow was covering the outside. Daniel woke up later than usual, tiredness rising from the late hours of work. When he opened his eyes, a strange feeling of emptiness enveloped him. Not because of work, but because of the strange change in the house. Max was sitting in the corner of the living room, his eyes staring blankly at the window, his arms holding Rocky as if it was the only comfort. The dog lay curled up in the boy's arms, his tired eyes still fixed on Daniel, as if the boy was waiting for something from him. Max did not say a word. Daniel walked closer, sitting down next to Max. He tried to speak, but the words were stuck in his throat. The silence was too heavy. This boy, his eyes bright but full of anxiety, was completely different from the children he had met. Not mischief or joy, but silence, the coldness of someone who had been through too much. "Max." Daniel called the boy's name softly. "We'll get through this together. But you have to tell me what happened. I can't help you if I don't know." Max didn't respond right away. He looked down at the floor, where the light from the window shone in, creating small streaks of light on the old wooden floor. Just when Daniel thought Max would say nothing more, a sigh escaped the boy. "I don't know what to say," Max whispered, his voice filled with fear and despair. "All I know is, I have no one but this dog. He's my everything." Daniel looked at the boy, his eyes softening. He could see clearly that Max had not only lost his family, but was suffering from a deep pain, a pain that he couldn't share with anyone. "Max, I know you're hurting, but I promise to help you. You're not alone." Daniel tried to comfort him, but he also realized that these words, though sincere, couldn't erase Max's past. Max raised his head, his eyes slightly moist. "Ah, I lost my mother and father when I was young. I lived in an orphanage, but when I grew up, I was placed in another foster family. And they didn't treat me well." Max took a deep breath, as if trying to control himself. Daniel said nothing, just listened, as Max recounted the dark days in another foster family. Max told of the unreasonable beatings, of the vicious curses, of being locked in a dark room with no one to care. He told of a man named Ray Holloway, a foster father he called evil. Ray wasn't like the others. Not only did he beat me, but he also. Max stopped, his eyes panicked, as if he couldn't continue. "I couldn't take it anymore, and then I ran away." Daniel listened to Max's every word as if it were a stab in the heart. The boy's words, though brief, were enough to show the extent of the cruelty Max had endured. Daniel couldn't help but feel resentment towards a man named Ray Holloway, but he also knew that now he could help Max overcome everything. "Max, I know you feel helpless right now, but I won't let Ray or anyone else hurt you again," Daniel said firmly, his eyes shining with determination. Max looked at him, his gaze gradually changing. A fragile trust began to grow in the boy, as if this was the first time the boy felt sheltered, protected. At that moment, Daniel decided that he needed to do something to help Max overcome his pain and find true safety. He took Max and Rocky for a walk around the neighborhood that afternoon. The three of them, not a family in the traditional sense, but they formed a special bond. During the trip, Daniel began to feel a change in his relationship with Max. Although Max still did not talk much, there was a sense of closeness, a sense of empathy that he had never felt before. This trip not only helped them to dispel some of their loneliness, but also opened up an opportunity for Daniel to truly understand and help Max on his healing journey. Max finally began to open up. After stopping at a park bench, Max looked up at Daniel and said, "I don't know what I would do without you and Rocky." It was the boy's first thank you, even though it was just a short sentence, but it was full of meaning. Daniel felt a warmth in his heart, realizing that he was doing the right thing. The mysterious disappearance the next morning, a thin layer of fog still covered the house. Daniel woke up late again, his body tired after staying up late all night and taking care of Max. He went down to the living room and saw the boy sitting by the window, watching the white snow falling outside. Max seemed pensive, but at least today he was calmer. That made Daniel feel relieved, even though he knew that difficult days were still ahead. Max still didn't say much. The boy just looked forward, his eyes seemed to be thinking deeply about something. Daniel knew that Max's past was not easy to overcome, but he still tried to give the boy a sense of security and a solid support. "Where are we going today?" Daniel asked, breaking the quiet space. Max turned to look at him, smiling gently, although the smile was a bit faint. "Can we go for a walk? I want to go out for a while." Daniel nodded, and soon the three of them, Max, Rocky, and Daniel, stepped outside into the quiet of the winter morning. The snow continued to fall, covering everything in a layer of soft, white cotton, creating a peaceful atmosphere, but inside it contained unsolved secrets. As the three of them walked through a deserted street, Daniel began to feel something was wrong. It had been a few days, and Max still hadn't shared any more information about his past. Daniel knew that the boy hadn't opened up completely, but he couldn't force him to do so right away. However, there was something that Daniel felt was strange. The boy looked over his shoulder suspiciously, and Max's gaze seemed to be searching for something in the air. "Max, what are you looking for?" Daniel asked, trying to make his question not too forced. Max didn't answer right away, but looked around the neighborhood, his eyes suddenly filled with worry. Then after a moment, he said softly, "Definitely not." The boy looked confused, as if someone was watching them. Daniel didn't understand what Max meant, but he sensed a distinct change in the boy's demeanor. Max turned to look at him, but said nothing. "Let's go back, Daniel," Max said softly, but his voice was filled with worry. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but then decided not to push. He agreed, and the three of them headed back to the house. As soon as he got home, Max quickly went back into his room and closed the door, creating a private space for himself. Daniel felt something was wrong, and a feeling of anxiety rose in his heart. Max had yet to share what had made him so anxious. While Daniel prepared dinner, he tried to figure out how to deal with this problem. A few hours later, when Max reappeared in the living room, Daniel noticed that the boy seemed more tired and stressed than usual. He sat down next to Max and said softly, "Max, is something wrong? You don't have to hide it from me." Max looked at him, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The boy seemed to want to say something, but hesitated, as if some invisible force was holding him back. Finally, Max took a deep breath and said, I think someone is looking for us." Daniel felt the tension in his heart. "Who?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Ray," Max said, his voice choked. "I know Ray would never give up looking for me. He wouldn't let me get away from him." Daniel felt dizzy, and a sense of resentment rose within him. How could Ray do that? But more than that, Daniel knew that things were no longer simple. Max was living in real fear, and the three of them might never be at peace if Ray Holloway continued to search for Max. "Max, you won't have to face Ray alone. I promise to protect you, no matter what," Daniel said, his voice firm and resolute. He knew that right now, it wasn't just a matter of protecting a boy. It was a matter of protecting a life from an evil person, and that couldn't be taken lightly. Max looked at Daniel with hope in his eyes, as if for the first time the boy felt like he could trust someone. "I don't know what I would do without you, Daniel." Daniel decided to do more than just protect Max. He began to plan to find a way to stop any danger from Ray Holloway. He would not let anyone, no matter how evil, continue to harm children like Max. Running away from the past, the three of them, Daniel, Max, and Rocky, sat in the living room late one afternoon. Snow was still falling outside, creating a peaceful yet gloomy scene. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Max's warning about Ray Holloway. Even though he had promised to protect Max, that didn't mean it would be easy. Ray wasn't a simple man, and Daniel knew that if he didn't act soon, Max's life would be in danger at any moment. Max was as quiet as ever. He didn't say much, but Daniel could clearly feel the worry in Max's eyes. There was a deep fear that he couldn't hide, and that was his past, a past full of wounds that Max couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. "Max, if you don't want to tell me, I won't force you." Daniel began, trying to keep his voice calm. "But I need to know everything about Ray, so we can face him." Max looked down at the floor, then closed his eyes as if to avoid Daniel's gaze. After a long while, the boy finally spoke. "I can't forget what he did. Every time I close my eyes, I see him standing there, his eyes full of hatred. I've run away for so long, but he won't let me go, Daniel." Daniel didn't say anything, just silently looked at Max, feeling the pain the boy was suffering. He knew that the past couldn't be erased with just words, but if Max continued to live in this fear, he would never be able to have a peaceful life. Therefore, Daniel was determined to help Max overcome that fear, no matter how scary it was. The next day, Daniel decided not to leave Max alone in this state anymore. He goes to find out more about Ray Holloway, hoping that he can find important clues that can help them stop this man. He visits several locations in the city where Ray may have appeared or been involved in the strange incidents that Max had told him about. During his days of searching for clues, Daniel meets Detective Sarah Collins, an old friend who has helped him in previous investigations. Sarah is a strong, sharp woman who is not afraid to confront dangerous situations. Daniel has not seen her for a long time, but now he needs her help too. "Clarify what is happening to Max, Sarah. I need your help. I am investigating a man named Ray Holloway. He is related to the past of a boy, Max, who I am taking care of. I don't know everything clearly, but I feel that he will not give up easily." Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of seriousness. "Daniel, if it involves Max, I'm willing to help. But we have to be careful. Ray is not an easy person to deal with." "Of course," Daniel replied. "We have to do everything to protect Max." The two began to investigate Ray Holloway further, trying to learn about his relationships and the unusual incidents surrounding him. They quickly discovered that Ray had a criminal record related to child abuse and was connected to several illegal organizations. But what was more frightening was that Ray was not only an abuser, but also a powerful person, able to control and manipulate everyone around him. While Daniel and Sarah investigated, Max continued to stay at home with Rocky. The boy still did not talk much, but sometimes Daniel could sense the uneasiness in Max's eyes. The boy kept looking out the window as if waiting for someone to appear. And one day it happened. When Daniel returned home after a long investigation, he found Max standing by the window, his eyes filled with worry. "Did you see anything?" Daniel asked. Max didn't answer right away, but eventually he nodded. "Ah, I saw someone standing outside the window, Daniel. He was watching us." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He ran to the window and looked out, but saw nothing but falling snow. However, the feeling of unease remained, and he knew that Max was not lying. Ray had started following them. As the situation became more and more tense, Daniel decided that he had to do something to protect Max immediately. He could not let the boy continue to live in fear. He contacted Sarah, and together they made a plan to move Max to a safe place, out of Ray's reach. The next day, they began to prepare for a secret move, but Max still did not understand everything that was happening. He sensed a change in the atmosphere, but did not dare to ask too much. The relationship between Daniel and Max became closer and closer, but the anxiety about Max's safety did not subside. A dangerous investigation. The surroundings are cold. The fog is thick over the city as Daniel and Sarah begin their investigation. They decide to go beyond protecting Max and delve deeper into Ray Holloway's past to find clues that will help them stop him. After discovering horrifying information about him, Daniel knows they are facing a huge challenge. Daniel sits in a deserted coffee shop where he has arranged to meet Sarah to discuss the details of the investigation. The detective looks at him with determination, but Daniel cannot hide his anxiety. They have started investigating public records, but what they have found is only the tip of the iceberg. "We need to find Ray's victims, Sarah," Daniel says, his voice tense. "Only they know what he did and can provide evidence to help us." "Yes," Sarah replies, her eyes sharp. "I've contacted a few people who were in foster homes that Ray was in. But we'll have to be careful. Ray is a man of influence, and not everyone is willing to speak out against him. So where do we start?" Daniel asks, his eyes full of concern. "We'll find one of the victims he's cut out of his life, the ones who disappeared without anyone noticing," Sarah replied, the coldness in her voice making it clear that she was prepared to take any risk. Over the next few days, Daniel and Sarah gathered more and more evidence on Ray Holloway, but what they found was not simple. Every lead led down dark alleys into incomplete stories. They found a former victim of Ray's, a man named Jonas, a man who had lived in a foster home that Ray had controlled for years. Jonas, though he has overcome the pain of his past, still bears the scars of his past. When Daniel and Sarah meet Jonas, he is no longer the image of a weak, oppressed man, but his eyes are haunted by memories of his past. Ray, he never gives up. "No one dares stand up to him," Jonas says, his voice filled with fear. "I escaped, but I know he will not stop searching." Jonas tells them about the miserable life he endured under Ray's control. He is not only an abuser, but also has connections to underground organizations, powerful people who can manipulate the legal system. "Underground organizations?" Daniel asks, unable to hide his surprise. "Ray is involved with major criminal organizations." "Not just criminals," Jonas replies, his face serious. "Ray has sought to take over helpless children, manipulating them to serve his own dark purposes. But he never works alone. There are others behind him, people who, if you mess with them, will not survive." Sarah and Daniel exchange glances. They knew they were entering a battle more dangerous than ever. Ray Holloway was not just a simple abuser, but a man with a dangerous network that could threaten the lives of anyone who dared to stand up to him. After meeting Jonas, Daniel and Sarah continue their investigation, but the challenges only get bigger. One day, as Daniel is driving home, he receives a call from Sarah. The detective says in a hurried voice, unable to hide her anxiety, "Daniel, we have a big problem. I just found out that Ray knows we're investigating him. He's planning a revenge plan." "Revenge?" Daniel asks, his voice tense. "Are you sure?" "Definitely," Sarah replies. "And I think he started following us. I don't know where he got the information, but I have a feeling we're being watched every step of the way." Daniel quickly takes Max and Rocky to a safe place. But the worry is not only about protecting Max, but also about ensuring the safety of himself and Sarah. They must act quickly, or they will fall into the hands of Ray and his organization. Their plan was to prepare for a direct confrontation, but not in the way they had thought. A confrontation with Ray Holloway might be more than just an investigation. It might be a fight to the death. Secrets revealed, the suspense and tension continue as Daniel and Sarah continue their investigation. After meeting Jonas, pieces of Ray Holloway's past begin to emerge, but it also opens up more questions than answers. Every step they take is like a rope that is pulling them deeper into a dangerous game with an enemy they don't fully understand. With new information from Jonas, they begin to have a clearer picture of the criminal network that Ray Holloway is involved in. However, everything is not enough to make them act aggressively. Every plan must be carefully prepared, because Ray Holloway is not someone to be defeated easily. We need to find all of Ray's connections, Sarah, Daniel says, his voice full of determination. Only then can we find a way to deal with him effectively. Sarah nodded, but her eyes couldn't hide her worry. I've worked on a lot of big cases, but this one, Ray Holloway is really different. He's built a very complex network, and he's not just a criminal. It seems like he's hiding more than we thought. We'll have to dig deeper, Daniel said, his hand tightening on the pen. Investigate step by step. No detail can be left out. Sarah continued to investigate Ray's relationships, and this time she discovered an important detail from a reliable source. According to new information, Ray had a house outside the city, where he was said to do business with people in organized crime. This opened a new direction in the investigation. This house doesn't seem like a simple hideout. I think Ray's hiding some important documents there, Sarah said as they sat in her office, looking over maps and files. We'll have to go there, Daniel said, his eyes determined. If what we think is true, this house could be the key to putting everything together. The two decided to go to Ray's house. Although they knew it could be dangerous, they understood that this was their only chance to find solid evidence. However, they didn't want to act on impulse. Daniel called Max, asking him to stay home for safety. Max, I'm going to be gone for a while. You and Rocky stay home. I'll be back soon, Daniel said over the phone. Max didn't answer right away. After a while, the boy spoke up, his voice filled with worry. Are you going to be okay? I'll be fine, Daniel reassured, but he couldn't help but worry. Ray had started following them, and Daniel's every move could now be detected by his enemies. Daniel and Sarah arrived at Ray's house late at night. From a distance, they could see the only light still on in the house. Everything was quiet, no one but the thick darkness. They approached the front door, but just as Sarah was about to push it open, a light flashed from inside the house. We've been detected, Sarah whispered, worried. Daniel glanced at her, then quickly pulled out his phone. I'll notify Max and make sure he's protected. You go find out what's going on inside the house. I'll block the road outside. While Sarah went inside the house to continue searching for information, Daniel went outside and looked around to protect the surrounding area. His sense of unease increased when he noticed a car parked nearby, with figures furtively observing. Daniel didn't dare to take any risks and quickly retreated, deciding to change his plan. Sarah entered the house. She found a secret room located at the back of the house. In it, there were some important files and documents that Ray seemed to have deliberately hidden. Sarah couldn't help but shiver as she read through these documents. They were not only related to underground criminal organizations, but also contained information about children being kidnapped and manipulated to serve dark purposes. Sarah immediately took pictures and recorded all the evidence she had. She knew this was the treasure they were looking for. But before she could leave the room, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Sarah, Daniel called from outside on the phone. Watch out, someone's coming. The tension was so intense that Sarah couldn't wait any longer. She had to leave quickly or she would be caught. Daniel and Sarah quickly escaped the house, but there was no time to make sure everything was safe. They had taken important evidence, but there was no telling how Ray would react when he found out. When he returned home, Daniel immediately checked with Max. Although everything seemed fine for now, Daniel knew there was no time to waste. They had to act immediately if they wanted to put Ray in jail before he could do anything. The battle of the city courthouse was more crowded than ever, the noise, the hurried footsteps, and the whispers signaling a tense trial. Daniel stood outside the courtroom, his hands clutching the important files Sarah had collected from Ray Holloway's house. These documents could be the key to ending Max's suffering and bringing Ray to justice. But he knew this fight would not be easy. Max stood beside Daniel, his eyes filled with worry, but also a little hope. He was used to fear and abandonment. Today, after all, was another day to fight for justice, and Max felt, for the first time in his life, that he could truly trust the people around him. Max, I will do everything I can to protect you, Daniel whispered, looking at the boy with determination in his eyes. No matter what happens, we will not give up. Max nodded, but still couldn't dispel the anxiety in his heart. What about Ray? Will he get away? Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes determined. No, he won't get away again. Inside the courtroom, bright lights shone on the stage of justice. All eyes were on the parties involved in the trial. Facing each other were Ray Holloway's defense attorneys and the prosecutors, with Daniel and Sarah playing a key role in providing evidence. Ray's side was a team of experienced lawyers, always trying to find ways to reduce the level of his crimes. They attacked not only the evidence, but also the authenticity of the witnesses, especially Max, who would be the most important witness in the trial. What Max said about Ray was just a lie. He can't prove that what he said was true. One of Ray's attorneys shouted from the room, trying to undermine Max's credibility. Daniel stood up, preparing to retort. This is irrefutable evidence. The records from Ray's home, along with the statements of other victims, all point to his involvement in crimes and abuse. The courtroom fell silent as Daniel detailed the evidence he had gathered. Photographs, documents about organizations Ray was associated with, records proving the child abductions and abuse he had committed. This was evidence that could not be denied, but the defense was adamant in denying it. The trial continued, and it was Max's turn to testify. This was the moment when the boy faced his greatest fear, standing in front of the public and telling his painful story of what Ray Holloway had done. Max stepped up to the witness stand, his eyes filled with anxiety. But when he saw Daniel sitting in the row below, he felt the steadiness of the only protector he had. He took a deep breath and began. Ray, he abused me. He made me do things no one should do. I couldn't live in fear of that anymore, and I ran away, Max said, his voice choked but determined. Outside, the people in the courtroom fell silent. Max's story was not just the testimony of one child, but the voice of many victims of Ray's past. Max's words touched the hearts of those present, and they began to take things more seriously. However, Ray's defense team did not give up easily. They immediately attacked the validity of this testimony, trying to undermine Max's credibility. This boy may have been influenced by others. He may not have truly understood what happened, one of Ray's lawyers said, trying to deny it all. After a few tense days, the testimony and evidence from Daniel, Sarah, and Max created an insurmountable pressure on Ray's defense. Finally, the clear and convincing evidence forced the jury to accept Ray's guilt. During this time, Max went through a strong internal struggle. He had been deeply hurt by his past, but today he stood up for justice and stood up for himself, for the other children, and for those who had been harmed by Ray. Max calls it a victory not just for him, but for all those who have suffered in silence over the years. Finally, the verdict was in. Ray Holloway was found guilty and held accountable for his actions. A part of Max's life was freed, but he knew he had a long way to go before he could fully heal. The truth is uncovered. Although Ray Holloway was convicted, Max and Daniel's sense of victory was not complete. Max's heart was still not completely healed. Although he had won justice, Max still had to face the pain he had caused. After the trial, Max continued to live in Daniel's house, where he felt safe, but the bad memories did not easily disappear. Max was sitting alone in his room, next to Rocky. The dog was the only friend he felt he could completely trust. Quiet afternoons like this gave Max time to think, but also forced him to face the deep emotions he could not avoid. Daniel walked into the room and saw Max sitting there, silent as usual. "Are you okay, Max?" Daniel asked, his voice full of concern. Max did not answer right away. The boy raised his head, looked into Daniel's eyes, and then his eyes blurred with tears that he was trying to hold back. "I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to forget it all." Daniel sat down next to the boy, placing his hand on Max's shoulder. "We'll get through this together, Max. I promise you. Today is just the first step in the healing journey." The next day, Daniel and Max set out to find a therapist for Max, someone who would help him overcome the deep wounds left by his past. Daniel knew that Max needed long-term support, and he didn't want to leave him alone on this difficult journey. Max wasn't very excited to enter the therapy room. He was a little scared and shy, as if opening up to a stranger was too difficult. But Daniel was there, encouraging and reassuring him. After a short time, Max begins to open up to his therapist, sharing the painful memories he cannot forget. I always felt like I didn't deserve to be loved, Max says, his voice breaking. I felt like I was just a toy that Ray could do whatever he wanted with, and then throw away. The therapist listens and slowly guides Max to realize that these thoughts are not true. He deserves to be loved and cherished, and that psychological wounds can be healed, even if it takes time. While Max begins his journey to healing, Daniel receives an unexpected call from Sarah. She informs him that during their further investigation into the criminal organizations that Ray Holloway is involved in, they have discovered an important detail. Ray is not the only one in his family involved in criminal acts. Daniel, there's someone else in Ray's family who might be involved in all of this, Sarah said, her voice strained. Someone no one's ever heard of, but who might be helping Ray run his underground organizations. Who is it? Daniel asked, worry rising in his stomach. We need to find out more, but this could be a very dangerous person, Sarah warns. Daniel feels a vague sense of fear. Although Ray has been convicted and is in custody, the threats are not over yet. The story of Ray Holloway seems to have not ended, and now another secret is starting to unfold. Daniel decides to find out more about the person Sarah mentioned. Together with Sarah, they discover that this person is involved in an international criminal organization and may have helped Ray run illegal operations. They follow the traces from the documents Sarah collected, and these discoveries make them panic. Ray is not the only one with power in the family, and now someone with even greater influence is lurking in the shadows. Meanwhile, Max continues his therapy and gradually opens up about his feelings and memories. Each time the boy shared a part of his story, a weight was lifted. Still, Max could not forget everything that had happened, and many nights he would wake up in panic. Rocky was always there to comfort him, never leaving his side. Daniel began to notice that something strange was happening. He felt a change in his life. Max was no longer the wounded child he had saved. He was starting to grow up, thinking and acting more maturely. And most importantly, Max was learning to move on from his old wounds. Daniel, I feel different. I feel like I can start over, Max said, his eyes no longer sad but hopeful. Daniel looked at Max, smiled, and patted him on the shoulder. You did great, and we will go through this together. Nothing is impossible. Building relationships, spring has come to town, but the brighter days can't mask the tension in Daniel's heart. Although Max is starting to heal and become stronger, Daniel knows there are still challenges ahead. Today, Max completed another therapy session, and the therapist noted a significant improvement in his attitude and emotions. But even so, there is still a gap between what Max needs and what he can face. Max is no longer the child who avoided everything. He has opened up to Daniel, talking about memories from his past that he had never shared before. The two have begun to build a stronger relationship, like father and son, even though Max never had a real family until he met Daniel. One morning, while the two were having breakfast, Max looked at Daniel and exclaimed, I feel this feeling is so strange. I've never been able to talk to anyone so comfortably. Thank you for always being here. Daniel smiled and patted Max on the shoulder. You're my family, Max. I'll always be here, no matter what happens. With a change in Max's mentality, daily life began to return to normal. Max began to participate in outdoor activities, such as going for walks with Rocky and Daniel, or participating in sports activities that he used to love. Every afternoon, the three of them would go to the park together, where Max could feel the freedom and relaxation without having to worry about the past. These changes helped Max regain his faith in life and in the people around him. One day, while Daniel and Max were playing soccer in the park, Max suddenly stopped and looked at Daniel, his eyes full of seriousness. Do you ever feel like you're doing something important? Daniel stopped playing and looked at Max, noticing the maturity in the boy's eyes. What do you mean? Daniel asked, his eyes gentle, but also filled with concern. Max took a deep breath and continued, I think I'm starting to understand that it's not just me. There are so many other people who need help. I've lived in the dark for so long, but now I want to help others, just like you helped me. Daniel smiled, sensing a clear change in Max. That's a big decision, Max. I know you'll do great things. You don't just need to help yourself, you can be someone who helps others. With his mental and emotional recovery, Max gradually returned to his old friends. He began to participate in school activities again and integrate into the community. Although he still had occasional worries, Max became stronger. He began to feel that he could trust the people around him, and most importantly, he could rely on Daniel, the person he considered a father, who was always there to protect and encourage him. During this process, Daniel realized that he had truly become a father figure to Max. He not only helped him overcome the pain of the past, but also helped him build a bright future. This made Daniel feel that he had a purpose and responsibility in this life, and he never wanted to go back to those lonely and disconnected days like before. One night, while they were having dinner together at home, Daniel received a call from Sarah. She informed him that she had discovered another important piece of information in her investigation of the organizations that Ray Holloway was involved with. Daniel, I just discovered that one of the people behind Ray Holloway might be one of his former partners. This person might be the next danger we need to deal with, Sarah said, her voice full of worry. What are we going to do next? Daniel asked, although he was feeling a little worried about Max's safety. We need to act quickly before he can do more damage. But I need you, Daniel. Be prepared for anything, Sarah replied. Despite the great strides made in healing Max, Daniel knew that the battle with the past was not yet over. The danger from those behind Ray Holloway was always lurking, and he could not let his guard down. But now Daniel and Max were a stronger team than ever. Their father-son relationship was not just about protection, but also about growing together, facing life's challenges. Max looked at Daniel, his eyes filled with faith and hope. We'll get through it all together, right? Daniel smiled, patting Max on the shoulder. That's right, we'll always stand together. No one can tear us apart. A new family, the sun rose from afar, the gentle light shining on the garden in front of Daniel's house. It was a beautiful day. The air was fresh, and a sense of peace enveloped the house. This was the house that Daniel and Max had rebuilt together after many challenges. Now they were no longer two strangers, but a real family. Max stood in the yard, running and jumping happily with Rocky. The boy was no longer afraid, no longer hiding from the painful memories of past. He was enjoying the simple moments that he had never known before. Every step Max took now carried with it faith in himself and in the people around him. Daniel stood at the door, watching Max and Rocky, his heart feeling warm. He knew that, although the road ahead was long, the two had gone through the greatest difficulties in their lives. And now, the most important thing was that they had each other, a family full of love and support. A few weeks later, Daniel decided to do something important that he had been thinking about for a long time. He wanted to officially adopt Max. It was the most important step in his life, as he would not only be Max's guardian, but also the father that the boy had always needed. He prepared all the paperwork, contacted the authorities, and finally, the day they had been waiting for arrived, the adoption hearing. Max didn't say much about it, but Daniel knew that this was what the boy had always wanted, a real family to belong to. Max, this is important to us, and I want you to know that I will always be there for you, no matter what, Daniel said, his voice low and full of emotion. Max looked at Daniel, his eyes shining. I want that too. I want a family, and I know that you are it. The boy couldn't hide his emotions, his voice full of trust and love. On the day of the adoption hearing, Daniel and Max sat together in the courtroom. Although there were no arguments or tension, it was an important moment, and they both knew their lives were about to change forever. When the court officially declared Max Daniel's son, the atmosphere in the room became heavy and emotional. Max and Daniel both couldn't hold back their tears. We're family, Daniel said as they walked out of the courtroom, holding Max's hand tightly. Nothing will ever tear us apart again. Max looked at Daniel, feeling the warmth he had given her all this time. I don't know how to thank you, Max said, his voice choking up. You gave me a family, a place I can call home. We've always been together, Max, Daniel said, feeling pride and happiness fill his heart. That weekend, Daniel, Max, and Rocky decided to take a walk around town to celebrate the milestone in their lives. Max was no longer the lonely, broken child he had been. He was now an integral part of Daniel's family, and together they would face any challenge in the future. At a small roadside cafe, Max sat next to Daniel and looked out the window. The twinkling lights of the night reflected in the boy's eyes, and he felt a sense of peace he had never felt before. You know, I feel like I found my place, Max said, his voice soft but confident. Daniel smiled and patted Max on the shoulder. That's right. This is where you belong, Max. And we'll build a future together. The next day, Daniel took Max to the park, where they had spent many happy afternoons before. Max had joined a new sports class, and today was the first practice. He felt more confident than ever, and for the first time, Max realized that nothing was impossible with family and love. During the practice, he played happily with his new friends, and Daniel stood from afar, watching his son with pride. Back home, Daniel and Max sat together in the living room, enjoying a quiet evening. Max leaned his head on Daniel's shoulder, feeling a sense of security and peace that he had never felt before. Rocky lay under the table, his eyes following their every move, like an indispensable part of this family. "We will always be together," Daniel said, his voice warm and loving. Max smiled softly, his eyes shining with hope for the future. "I know, and I will never leave you." The end of the story marks the end of a long and arduous journey, not only a fight for justice, but also a journey to find family, love, and safety. Max overcame the pain of the past to find a new family, and Daniel, the father Max had always been looking for, brought him a new life full of hope. Their story is not only about protection, but also about maturity, about fatherhood, and about how each of us can heal and build a bright life from the wounds of the past. From now on, Daniel and Max will step into a new life together, full of opportunities and challenges, but above all, they will always have each other, a strong family. If this story has inspired you and helped you realize the value of love, perseverance, and the strength of family, don't forget to like and share this video to spread the positive message to more people. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on inspiring stories and valuable lessons. We will continue to bring you content that helps you develop yourself and live a better life. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. Together, we will build a strong, loving, and supportive community.